So, welcome to the Black Archive Stay for Home virtual series. My name is Louis Berthen. I am the assistant archivist. And today I'm going to be doing my segment, which is called Legacies, Profiles, and Greatness. And I kind of actually wanted to start off today a little bit differently. I wanted to start with a bit of an apology and kind of a challenge. So, I apologize because when I've been doing these profiles, I've realized that I've skewed very much towards men, and I have not given enough time to do profiles on women. So I'm going to challenge myself to do better and to do more profiles on women because there is no lack of incredible women figures in our history. Hi, Ruth Madison, thank you for joining. And just a caveat with that is that it's very hard to find documents, and not because there's no lack of incredible female figures, it's just they're less documented than the men were. And it's already hard to find documents on the men. So I'm going to try my best. I'm going to do more profiles on more women. So be excited for that. And so today we're going to be doing our segment on Annie M Coleman. And so we're going to talk about her. We're going to do her profile, and at the end I want to do something a little bit differently today. So hopefully you guys like it. So Annie M Coleman was born in Valdosta, Georgia in 1894. She went to school in Georgia with relatively few details to speak about. Unfortunately, this is one of the things. Just sometimes details just don't show up. She graduated from Payne College. She also attended the Baptist Institute in Columbia University. And she married young and had a son, but she was widowed soon thereafter. And this is when she met the Reverend James Coleman. And he was also a widow. He had 7 children, ages ranging from 5 to 21. And they got married and came down to Miami in 1922. So when she came to Miami, Miami was a booming city, but it was not booming equally in all parts of the city. Black Miamians still had to deal with racist and oppressive laws and social customs. However, this didn't stop Annie Coleman from fixing the issues that she saw with her new hometown. Colortown, which was the old name for Overtown, at the time was suffering from very poor conditions, such as poor housing, no paved streets, poor sanitation, as well as not having a library or any public parks. So a year after she arrived here in Miami, she actually organized something known as the Women's Club. And this club would become the forerunner to what eventually would become the Morel chapter of the Young Women's Christian Association. Later, and hi Granny Girl, thank you for joining. We're talking about Annie M Coleman today. So in 1936, she organized something called the Friendship Garden Club. And this club was started with the goal of doing beautification work in Colortown. She started this club along with 3 other white women named J.H. Geisen, J.T. Feaster, and C.H. Reeder. This club is actually one of the first instances of an interracial integrated women's committee, and on top of it all, they were a successful garden club. They actually won first place in a city competition. But they used their power for more than beautification projects. Annie Coleman, as soon as she started to realize this, actually changed the name of the club to the Friendship Garden and Civic Club. And to quote Annie Coleman, a garden club couldn't do the things that we did for the community. So it was at this time that she started doing more than beautification. A grocery store went out of business near where she lived, and she took it upon herself to turn it into a library for the community. And Mrs. Coleman led story hours there. On Saturdays, she ran a summer Bible school. It's credited with being one of the first for Black children on the East Coast. And it effectively ran as a community center. This library that she started was actually co-opted into the Miami-Dade library system 2 years after it opened. This library became known as the Dunbar Library, and it ran from 1936 to 1951. However, this was not enough for the club, and they actually connected with D.A. Dorsey, who was South Florida's first Black millionaire, and he actually donated the land that would become the Dorsey Memorial Library. And that happened about 15 days before he died, amazingly. The Friendship Garden and Civic Club helped collect funds to build the library here as well. They collected $2,000 from the community, and the city of Miami actually provided the other $7,000 to finish funding the project. This building was constructed and opened in August 13th of 1941. And hello to Natural Motion Studios. Thank you for joining. Hi, Logan's Frog. Thank you for joining. We were talking about Annie Coleman. So there's a photo again. And now I'm going to give you a little excerpt from an interview she gave in 1975. So this is kind of like a story of resistance, so I think you guys will like this. So Mrs. Coleman remembers the days when integrated meetings were a no-no, and Blacks who stirred up trouble were not well thought of. The funny thing about it is we were never afraid, she said. For one thing, we had these fine women on our side and they had so much influence. I just felt that as long as they gave us their support, we'd get things done. There was one time, however, when the going got sticky, Mrs. Coleman said. This was back in 1937, when the women's club, the White Club, wanted to have a black quartet sing at one of their gatherings. Well, Mrs. Coleman said, some of the white city officials didn't want that. But Mrs. Geisen wouldn't be outdone. She had her chauffeur drive to my house, pick up the young men, and she followed them to the club. And she laughed as she recalled the incident. The police lined both sides of the street, but nothing happened, she said. And just for some context, and this is here in Miami, okay? In 1920s, there was a canceled Negro spiritual concert before white audiences. The reason for the cancellation, and the police obviously came and broke it up, the reason for the cancellation was because it was against public policy at the time. In the 1930s, the KKK raided a white church with a black choir because the police let it be because, quote, there was an unwritten law in this town that colored people can't take part in the services of a white church. That's Miami, okay? So this is 1920s, 1930s Miami. And hello, the Directors Collective. Thank you for joining. We're talking about Annie Coleman today. And I have to give credit, obviously, to Mrs. Coleman, but also to Mrs. Geisen, because to use modern terminology, that was a great use of her privilege. She was able to push that and get these black men to perform and without any trouble from the city officials or the white policemen. And using your privilege for something like that is something to be commended. And personally speaking, when you go through history, you're reading stories like this, these glimmers of hope, this is one of the best parts of reading this kind of stuff, right? It's not all doom and gloom. But I'll continue. So Annie Coleman was also one of the players in the effort to get the first black police officers from Miami's colored community. So we'll read from that. One of the projects she is most proud of is that the women worked to get the city's first black policemen. Back in those days, men and boys would meet on the street corner to shoot dice. The white police would come along, run them off, and collect the money and put it in their pockets. The children coming over to the library would see that, and it wasn't good, she said. I felt that the black police in the neighborhood would be the answer to that problem. Mrs. Coleman and the women from the Friendship Garden and Civic Club met with the women from Trinity to decide what to do next. We were told to bring in 3 men that we could count on to work with us, and we called in Captain J.F. Scott, Father J.R. Colmer, and Dr. Ira P. Davis. All of them are dead now, she said. From there, we started the movement for black policemen. But the opposition was so great that it took us from 1937 to 1944 before we got them. Mrs. Coleman's son, Clinton, left his job as an elementary school teacher and became one of the city's first black policemen. When the streets of Colored Town needed paving, Mrs. Coleman was among the group to push for it. When Christian Hospital, the first and only black hospital in the city, needed money, Mrs. Coleman was among those spearheading the fund drive. So a couple weeks ago, we had talked about Judge Ellie Thomas and a little bit about the history of the Black Police Precinct and what they did. So along with Ira P. Davis, Reverend John Comer, and Captain James F. Scott, Annie Coleman is one of the people who helped push and institute the first 5 here in Miami. And without the help and the work of Annie Coleman, it's something that may very well have not existed. So we got to thank our hidden figures. You see, women also have a role to play in history, and that's unfortunately it's always been the case, but it's not been documented as well as it should have. So I'm going to continue just to finish this. All right. So Mrs. Coleman smiles at that. So she was known as the Mary McLeod Bethune of Miami, said one woman who's known her for years. Mrs. Coleman smiles at that remark. The late Mrs. Bethune, she said, spent many a day in her home when she was visiting Miami. Mrs. Bethune used to call me her daughter, she would say. When I'm gone, my daughter will carry on my work. The list of accomplishments could go on, and it has. At 85, she's lived long enough to be rewarded for some of her good works, but she says the greatest reward was just being able to leave her mark here. In 1966, a 144-unit housing complex was completed and named for her, the Annie Coleman Gardens, 2501 Northwest 56th Terrace. In a congratulatory letter to Mrs. Coleman at the time, Congressman Claude Pepper wrote, "You have contributed so much to the progress of our community in the housing and many other fields. It is an honor which you richly deserve, and all of your friends delight in this recognition of your many years of dedicated work. I am proud to count you among my friends. Representative Pepper, voice of sentiment of many Dade Countyans. So, just to finish up a little bit on the profile before I move on to the next part, she was a part of various organizations here in South Florida. She was part of the National Council of Negro Women, the Urban League, and the colored branch of the YWCA. And she was so impressive that, like I said, she was recognized by Mary McLeod Bethune, but she actually met with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when she came down to Florida. So I'm going to show you a couple photos of Annie Coleman. Ooh. Okay. So this is a photo of Annie Coleman, and she's pinning a corsage on Marian Anderson when she came down to visit in Florida. So this is a great photo that I was able to find. Here we have another photo. This is Annie Coleman here in the middle in the black dress with Eleanor Roosevelt touring Miami's Negro USO Center. Coleman, as a civic leader, invited the First Lady to visit and gave her an orchid. And this is Eleanor Roosevelt in this dress here. And this is a photo from the archives that has Eleanor Roosevelt standing here at the table and Miss Coleman sitting next to her. So Annie Coleman was an incredible figure, and now I want to I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So like I had read to you, she had the Annie Coleman Gardens open in Brownsville, which in 2501 Northwest 56th Terrace. So I'm going to do a little bit of context, a little bit of history for Brownsville, and we're going to continue on, okay? So Brownsville was the only place where a black man could purchase a reasonably priced home on a construction worker's salary. Otis Crawford told the Miami Herald in 1983. Crawford, like many of his neighbors, bought his home in the early 60s. Excerpts from the 1965 Urban Renewal Plan show that the city and county officials and community leaders sought to create a strong, stable residential neighborhood in Brownsville that included reducing population and dwelling unit densities. The plan encouraged redevelopment of the highest possible caliber for moderate and low-income families. Dade County's Negro ghettos are spreading, wrote Juanita Green, a reporter from the Miami Herald in a 1967 expose called The Negro and Housing. The growth is fastest in the Northwest, moving at a pace of about a block and a half a week. Green wrote that the core of the Brownsville ghetto boundary had been breached. From the inside, blacks yearned for a better life. From the outside, the white community was gripped with fear that the slums would, quote unquote, explode, as they had done by 1967 in 37 U.S. cities. This was best illustrated by what took place at a dirt bank that divided a black and white neighborhood near what is now the Arlington Heights Metro Rail Station. This is also not the first instance of a dividing line between these neighborhoods. There also was a very famous Liberty City wall that separated the black neighborhood from the white neighborhood in Liberty City. So I'll continue. There was a hill around 41st Street known as the War Zone, where blacks fought whites, said former Miami-Dade County Commissioner Neil Adams in a 1982 Miami News story. The whites had guns and the blacks had slingshots. Amid the strife, Brownsville's 20,000 residents held high expectations and yearned for self-sufficiency, with plans to build and manage their own factories, houses, and even devise their own welfare system. Eventually, Brownsville could become a municipality with its own taxation, police force, water, garbage collection, and other things that come under city governments, Gwendolyn Cherry, an attorney, told Miami Herald in 1968. Cherry was the director of the Economic Opportunity Program, program that sought federal funds to carry out social programs in Brownsville. Meanwhile, residents were excited to learn that 5.5 acres were being cleared near Northwest 19th and 60th Street to build decent public housing units with laundry hookups and a playground. This public housing project was named after prominent Brownsville civil rights advocate Annie M. Coleman. So, construction on the Annie Coleman projects was hastened after a 1967 Miami Herald report showed tenants living in squalid conditions, including human filth, exposed electrical wires, and broken down doors in Overtown. So just perk your ears up and listen to this part. The Miami Housing Authority helped find places for people to live as part of the area's urban renewal program. But the goodwill built during this time vanished as soon as Brownsville's neighbors caught wind that the man responsible for helping the poor find public housing in the area owned slums condemned as unfit for human habitation. Martin Fine, chairman of the Miami Housing Authority, told the Miami Herald in 1968 that he engaged in his own private urban renewal program because of his long-range plan to improve the neighborhood. 9 of the properties that Fine bought were found to be structurally unsafe and later condemned. So that was 1968. That was then. And now I'm going to give you a little update on what's going on with the Annie Coleman Gardens, okay? So I'm going to read to you from 2 newspaper articles, the Miami Times and the Miami Herald. The Miami Times article was written on October 9th, 2019, and the Miami Herald was written on September 28th, 2019. So from the Miami Times. Less than 30 days ago, every public housing family who resides in the Annie Coleman 14 public housing sites in Brownsville were informed that they would be temporarily relocated due to unacceptably high levels of both crime and substandard living conditions. So for those of you who've been tuning into my segments, this should sound a little familiar. But why does it sound familiar? We can call it a couple things. We can call it urban renewal. You can call it slum clearance. You can call it gentrification. In the end, what it is the clearance of black folk from the area. Admittedly, this is maybe a little bit better than it was in the 50s and 60s because these people are getting the basics taken care of by the government at least. But at the end of the day, regardless of what any business planners say or any government official says, most of these people are not going to be coming back into this area. So this is from the Miami Herald. Rose Adams, who was elected head of Annie Coleman 14 Tenants Group, said the county representatives did not explain why Miami-Dade had suddenly concluded crime was too dangerous for tenants to remain. We had been living in these conditions for all this time, said Adams, who has lived at the complex since 2013, sharing an apartment with her son, daughter, and grandson. We're not understanding the urgency and the emergency. From the Miami Times. What's worse, a selection committee of over 20 experts and, quote, resident representatives, unquote, were assembled to consult with the county and developers on how the project should be built, without a single representative from the Brownsville community, nor a single voice from public housing in Brownsville. As the project steamrolled through adoption in July 2016, it was completely void of key participation and involvement from stakeholders in Brownsville. And the last thing on anyone's mind back then was the residents of Annie Coleman 14. But within a few weeks of learning about what was going on, the Brownsville Civic Neighborhood Association, led by President Kenneth Kilpatrick, stepped up and objected that there was no representation from Brownsville on the selection committee. And although the brand new public housing units were being built in Brownsville, none were being slated for the Annie Coleman residents. This is from the Miami Herald. Like other metropolitan areas, Miami-Dade relies on federal funding to maintain its public housing system, and yearly appropriations don't match needs. What else is new? The county's 2020 budget lists $420 million in deferred maintenance needs for the 9,700 units reserved for low-income residents. Miami-Dade has joined a federal, listen, now perk up your ears again. Miami-Dade has joined a federal program that allows for-profit developers more options in pursuing public housing projects. The Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, commonly called RAD, grants developers a 20-year stream of federal rental assistance for upgraded or new public housing units, and the companies can essentially serve as managers of the complexes. So my question to you is, if it didn't work in 1968, why would it work now? If Martin Fine could take advantage of the situation and build 9 places that were structurally unsafe and make money off of it, why wouldn't these developers do the same thing, since they can now serve as the managers of the complexes? Which also opens up a whole other can of worms, but we'll leave that for a little bit later. I hope that everyone who's listening wants to discuss or wants to participate in this conversation, because this is something that's happening right now in our community. So I'm just going to give you a couple details, a couple other little things. So the Oxford definition of gentrification is that the process of renovating and improving a house or district so that it conforms to middle class taste. So I'm going to go on now. So in a report from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, even though the majority of people who were pushed from their neighborhood during a revitalization, the majority of these people wanted to move back in, only 21% of those were able to obtain a living space in their old neighborhood. And this is not the glitch. This is the feature, okay? So for me, gentrification is an extension of slum clearance and urban renewal. then this is, like I said, this is not a problem that's just in our neighborhood. This is something that's happening all over the world. So we'll go through the history of it here in Miami. Slum clearance in the 1930s and 40s resulted in the building of the original Liberty Square housing project in 1939. The Urban Renewal project, the Urban Renewal plan of the 50s and 60s, worked closely with the State Department to carefully plan where the I-95 was going to be placed. Originally, one of the plans were to build the I-95 directly on top of the railroad so that it wouldn't displace anybody. But the white developers, businessmen, and city officials at the time decided that this wouldn't help with what they called the blighted neighborhood. They were talking about Overtown. So they used the I-95 as a catalyst to clear out Overtown, displace tens of thousands of people, and essentially destroy a neighborhood. I think it's also worth mentioning, so that basically tears Overtown apart since people that live in Liberty City, Brownsville, the Model City area. It's also worth mentioning that all the neighborhoods that are now at risk of gentrification and displacement were neighborhoods that people of color were redlined into in the first place. And so we'll continue. This is just getting into a little bit what's going on here in Miami. Right now, even though no one can afford to buy houses, prices in Alapata, Brownsville, Little Haiti, Liberty City, and Overtown are booming. And at the end of it, this is the goal of gentrification. It's not the eminent domain of the past. Now you can just price people out very quietly and conform it to middle-class tastes. And I think that also bears some discussion. What does that mean? When someone thinks of middle class, I think what a lot of people would first think of is the suburbs. And the suburbs, in a lot of ways, have their own troubling legacy. Like, they are the legacy of white flight during the civil rights era. So I ask you again, what does conforming mean when it says you're bringing an area to middle class tastes? And just to finish this off, the last thing is that most people who are displaced, like in the case of the M Coleman residents, they take Section 8 and they are moved to Homestead in Florida City. And just because I like to be depressing, let's bring it all around and let's talk about climate change. Okay, by 2050, projected flood rates will affect 800,000 homes in South Florida. That's 30 years from now. What are the lowest lying areas in South Florida? Homestead is one of the lowest lying areas, one of the first places that's going to be affected. So, however, in spite of this information, construction has continued at a breakneck pace here in South Florida. So my question to you all is, who benefits? It's not people, it's not the people like you and me. So that brings us to the end of my segment today. I was hoping that we can get a little more discussion. Gentrification is one of those hot topics. So if anyone wants to talk about it, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions about M Coleman, I'd love to answer those too. But generally, I just want to thank you guys for listening to me, for joining me for another segment this week. While I'm waiting for a couple more questions, just remember to stay safe. We live in the epicenter now, so just wear your mask and try not to go out as much as you can. And so I'm not getting any questions. I was hoping that would get a little more conversation because, gentrification is such a hot topic. But it's all right. We'll leave it for a panel, I guess. So thank you guys for listening to me again. I really appreciate you. And like I said, so let me show you a photo of M Coleman one more time. And, really got to channel the energy of M Coleman. She came to a new town and she saw the problems that it had and she made a difference in it. And I think that's something that we need to channel in our communities as well. And that comes with calling things out the way you see them. So I appreciate you guys. I will be back hopefully with another profile on another woman. So thank you guys for listening to me today. I appreciate you. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week.